We're going to focus on getting to know Igor and Dwight, and of course, answering any questions that come through. I would really like it if you could put your questions in the Q&A box. We will take them through chat. They will probably default to going just to myself and Dwight. That's fine. But we definitely have time for audience questions as well. And we'll try to hit, I think we could potentially hit almost all the questions that were submitted in advance. So I think we're doing great today. My name's Kim Johnson, and I'm the VP of Marketing. I'm going to go and take our intro slide down so that you can just focus on us and our conversation, and we can take this really any direction. So Dwight, thank you so much for coming, taking time out of your day. I know you felt like you probably had to, but when I schedule things, I know you love joining and doing things like this and just talking about Igor and Nexos.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to be part of this, and yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
All right, I'm going to do the classic bio, so I'll keep it short because Dwight, I'm sure you get tired of hearing this about yourself, but just in case if anyone's not familiar, Dwight has over 20 years of tech entrepreneur experience. He's really been in the clean tech and smart building industry for most of those years. He's currently, obviously, the CEO and founder of Igor. We are a power over Ethernet intelligent building software company described by Cisco as a disruptor. Igor's flagship product, Nexos, is an IoT smart building platform that uses the structured and tested PoE cable to make intelligent buildings a reality. Previously, Dwight founded and sold QAS, a building management, analytics, and energy technology company that had installations at universities across the country and at the US Capitol complex, except the White House. I believe that is always a little addition there. So we will just start and dive into some of our questions. I'm going to begin with really some of them that come in about Igor. I've added a couple of my own as well. It's a great opportunity for me to get Dwight to answer some of my questions also. But let's just start with the basic. There's a couple that we get asked all the time. And the very first one is, how did you come up with the idea for what Igor does?
Yeah, it's as all good inventions start, it's see a need, fill a need. And my last company, as Kim was mentioning, we took data from a lot of places, we gamified it. Through those games, we were able to incentivize users through pizza parties and things like that at universities to reduce energy consumption. And we saw a 50% energy reduction in many cases. So it was fantastic. The challenge with it was it took about a year to get good data to create the games. And the only thing we could really do with it was to incentivize behavioral change, because it was too hard to change the automation system itself and control it. So I wanted to break down those barriers. Also, it was very difficult if there were problems to identify in a control system. There's lots of links in a chain from where a sensor sees something to sending that communication to automating a response to sending something to command to do something and seeing something happen. So those were the problems that we had. And I wanted to just break down control systems into being more of like Lego pieces, things that were just simple and easy to use and deploy and to assemble, so that you can troubleshoot easily, so that you could come up with new ideas more easily. And the whole process could be more of this cycle, like an agile process. So those were really the problems I saw. And I saw the only way to get to, automation systems to get beyond the basics was to have a really solid foundation like that could grow easily. And so that's, Igor's fulfilled that vision. I'm really excited about that.
So you've always imagined Igor as a smart building company, because in the very beginning, you focused on lighting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so lighting was kind of a Trojan horse in the sense that the vision was always the entire building and all the different silos. But, I would look at other examples in the market, the broad market of how businesses start and where they go from there. And an example would be Salesforce, where they started as a customer relationship management system. But if you look at them today, they're force.com. They do a bunch of different things. So similar pattern for us was, what is the most basic thing that would give us the most advantage to be a starting point? And it was lighting, because lighting is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. So if you install our technology in lighting, then today our nodes have USB and many other connections to it. So imagine that at every light you have a USB connection that now you can use for any other type of sensor and really extend it so easily, right? So it was just a really good starting point. It was very provocative. We could do things in lighting that others can't, like control each individual fixture, monitor the energy at each fixture separately. And so that's really why we started there.
Yeah, if lighting doesn't work in a building, everyone knows it. So that's definitely, if you can get that right, you can add on other systems. A very common question we've got to ask, how did you come up with the name Igor?
Yeah, so Igor, like Frankenstein, bringing something to life. Igor is bringing things to life on the network. So, and it's really this whole conversation around OT, or operational technology, that's not on the network, like analog technology and serial bus technology, that more traditional type of devices, bringing those so that they're digitally connected on the network. In our system, you just plug something into a node that could already be there from a year ago, and it just shows up in the API. So it just makes it seamless and super quick and easy.
Well, a couple of quick questions then about the really early days of Igor. Who was your first employee, and are they still at Igor?
So I think my first employee would have been Jared Sundstrom. He's still here, director of technology. And it was interesting. He actually came on before starting Igor, because after selling my last company, I did consulting for Siemens at their global level in their building technologies group. And I assembled a team of people, and he was one of those people that was doing some great things in that group. And then over time, I decided to create Igor and kind of disbanded that group, but brought him along. And that was the beginning of Igor.
Yeah, even before you, he was the first employee technically.
Yeah.
So cool, very cool, and just goes to show how much we've got quite a few employees that were really early employees that are still here today. So I think that's a great testament to your leadership as well, Dwight.
We've got a great set of people with an awesome culture, and we've obviously evolved a lot since those beginning days. So it says a lot about their adaptability, and we are the sum of our parts and the sum of our people.
And we have one more kind of early days question, and we're going to get a little bit more into some of the product questions that we've gotten. Who was your first ever paying customer?
So I think that would be SIPCO, which is the Central Iowa Power Cooperative, which is the largest power cooperative in Iowa. And so that was a testament to, if a utility, one of the most conservative type of industries and customers you can imagine, they were willing to take a risk with the technology because they saw the benefit was so overwhelming for how we can manage energy and reduce cost and really shape power loads and things like that. That's why they really leaned into this and became our first customer. And so they retrofit their headquarters, about half of the square footage at that site. And that would have been 2014 timeframe.
Yeah, it's our oldest case study, I think, and it's still a functioning operational site. So definitely exciting to have long customers as well when we think about how long our story has been. Most really our commercialization, would you say, Dwight, happened around 2018, where we really started to take off. 17 maybe in terms of the market. So that's very exciting to have someone that a legacy customer like that. We'll start switching into a little bit regarding the product more. So this is one of maybe my questions, but I think it addresses some of the questions that have come up as well. What are some of the top trends you're seeing today in the smart building industry?
Yeah, I think that one of the top trends is that people want, we'll come into a project and they will want to talk about lighting. We do all the things that are required now for advanced lighting control. I mean, there really isn't anything that we don't do. There, we go beyond that in the sense that you can even have emergency lights that the battery is down at a UPS by the switches. So it makes it, there's really no reason you need to get in the ceiling anymore because all the components last so long, which is fantastic. So the conversation really starts going around, and the whole reason for using the technology is what you can do beyond lighting. And so whether it's using lighting in advanced ways that can enhance your branding as a company with color and stuff like that, or animation, but also with sensors. So things like air quality sensing, understanding your space utilization, and people are, it really comes down to individual, really listening to the customer, understanding their needs, and what their business outcomes are. One of the things that I like to say is, people, especially today, they could work from home if they really wanted to. So what's the reason for using an office? It's got to be more than just a shelter. So if whatever those outcomes are really what we then start talking about and centering the conversation around, and you start learning what it is that matters to them. And the technology, by being like a set of Lego pieces, as I mentioned earlier, you can take the parts and pieces that matter to them and that are going to facilitate their business. And whether it's employee retention in an office or using your space most effectively, we do a lot of installs in Manhattan. So, and obviously the space is very costly out there, or in certain areas where the power costs a lot, talking about, and there's a lot of cities now that are employing new sustainability initiatives and regulations. So it's a matter of kind of narrowing in on what matters to the customer for their particular business cases and the regulations that are in place, and providing solutions.
Awesome. And I think you're starting to touch on a few things that we're starting to get in from the attendees today. You're hitting on things that I think you would argue it really is Igor's competitive edge. Would you mind going into a little more depth on what really sets our technology Nexos apart from other technology, like some of our competitors? What gives us that competitive edge?
Yeah, there's a few things, more than that actually, but I'll just try to narrow it down a little bit. At a broad level, so we are focused on the enterprise customer, and whether it's enterprise that's a very large building, or it could be a number of buildings across a portfolio, but that enterprise customer typically will have a need for managing a lot of devices, and having a easy way of doing that. You can imagine it's not an easy task. When you have tens of thousands of IP connected devices on a network, that can be an incredible task to understand what's going on. So for us, creating the reports and the management and the expertise and the tools and utilities, all those things make it so that you only see what matters and provides actionable information. And then you don't have to be as focused on maintaining the site, but rather utilizing the site. And to put another a common statement out there is data is the new oil, right? So everyone wants this, and that the data is so incredibly powerful, but you don't want to have to be focused, if you only have so much budget operational, you don't want to be focused on maintaining the site. You want to use that so that you can utilize that data and build new reports or feed that to other systems that come along that you can connect to our APIs and so forth. So that's really one of those that's really provocative. And then being able to easily connect different devices up to the node and see that easily come through to the network, and that makes it so much more agile as well.
Great. When I think about the smart building environment, there's, let's look at the niche level companies out there. There are companies that really do room scheduling well, or they really do a great job at creating sensors that will track people coming in and out of a space. So you've hinted at it, but where do you see Nexos fitting into that environment where there's all these niche applications?
Yeah, and that's where, as I was just saying, easily be able to connect different things up. And that's the key really, is this can be that unifying platform that acts as basically a digital twins platform. We provide context as close to the end device as possible. So you'll put, uh, by connecting those end devices to a node, the node self-describes those devices and you'll see those show up in the software. But then you can use whatever device you want, right? It's all about being agnostic. It's about enabling you. So if a new device comes along, via supporting all these different connectivities, such as USB or RS-45 serial and so forth, then when a new device comes out, let's say a new USB sensor, you can just pick that up and talk to us about if there's any integration required, but it's all software based at that point. You just go to a nearby node, you connect it up, it shows up in the software, and you can start utilizing that data, whether it's a new people count sensor or air quality sensor or Bluetooth beaconing or Bluetooth tracking, whatever it is that you want. And it just opens up all those possibilities. We only develop hardware that is that bridge between the OT and IT, but the individual sensors, the individual controls and lights and actuators, we don't want to be doing those. We just want to enable you to use the partners that have the best products out there. And the same thing on the software too. I mean, we have the APIs and we also support BACnet and MQTT and many other protocols so that you can use whatever technologies you want on the user experience side. You might have a great energy management system. You might have a great, building management system. You might have a user engagement portal, all these different things that you can just then hook up to the API. And we do all of that in between so that you don't have to worry about the IoT infrastructure. We take care of all that for you.
And then, so that's like this kind of bringing it all together at a platform level. That's what Nexos is. Really, Nexos comes from the Latin of nexus, which is a central connection point. So that's why, when we thought about naming the product, we went with Nexos there. Didn't continue the Frankenstein theme, but I think that's totally okay in this case, because it really reflects what the goal of the platform is. When we think about Igor's Nexos, that's kind of how it, and with all these niche applications out there, how it fits together. But when we think about large companies in this space, when we talk about infrastructure, everything like this, from Cisco to Schneider to Johnson Controls, where does Nexos fit in with the large companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, even just talk about the origin of our company a little bit again. Cisco and Siemens and others were interested in buying my last company. And so in 2013, Cisco came to me and said, well, what do you think about using power over Ethernet for lighting? And so from that point forward, I spent a lot of time with Cisco, and actually was just talking to them again today, and they have now debuted a integration that they've created that goes from their telepresence system to our APIs. And so that's, an example of these different integrations that can be created. And the more that we, enable others to integrate and connect, the more that you'll see these synergies occur between systems.
Thank you. So let's say you're in the room and there's a potential customer interested in this technology for their space. Who are your biggest advocates? Like, what roles are excited about this at a company, and who is the most resistant?
That's a good question. So, each customer is a little bit different. A lot of it may come from who's driving the initiative. So if IT is driving it, then they're, like we're talking to companies where they have a digital transformation group and that's driving it, but then it might feel like it's going against the grain in the facilities group, or in other cases, it's a business sponsor who is trying to drive business outcomes themselves, and it might be driving against the grain from someone else. But rarely is everyone on board perfectly, right? There's actually a lot of different people that are involved. So you'll have the whoever's sponsoring it. And we like to talk to the business, whoever's driving business outcomes, because at the end of the day, that's what really has value, is what kind of business outcomes. So that might be, the chief marketing officer, is someone in the C-suite typically. If it's driving operations outcomes, marketing outcomes, facility outcomes, energy outcomes, sustainability, but getting those stakeholders, and then the others are, whether it's the head of IT or the head of facilities, getting enough of a reason behind it so that then they get excited about it. And once they see it, they typically get pretty excited about it, because it can enable them to do their jobs more effectively. And, it's a technology, like we talked about before, that's more easy to understand once you implement the whole platform. Then if there's a problem, it can help identify where the problem is and so forth. A lot of platforms don't do that, so, and it also can help break down silos so that you don't have to have a whole bunch of individual platforms that you're maintaining. So from a cybersecurity standpoint, I know we'll talk about that later, but that also helps. But that's where, you get a lot of people really, it's kind of a, choose your own adventure. It's sorry, it's not a straight answer on that one, but it just really depends on the situation. You have to be able to understand your customer and understand, what all the different players are, so that you don't step on a landmine. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And speak to their values or the outcomes that they're really interested in. There's so many different positive outcomes of this technology, of unifying your space into one platform, that there will be something for everyone. It's just making sure that no one's left out of understanding how they're getting the love, so to speak. So
and it's just human nature. Everyone wants respect, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone's left out of the conversation and the conversation progresses to a certain point, then that's going to feel like someone got sidelined. And so just being respectful of people and trying to incorporate as many people early on as process as possible. And once when you do it that way, it's a lot of fun, because you start talking about the possibilities of what, and start keeping the conversation focused, because you got to get building permits and occupancy, and you don't want to cause any issue with budget or delays, but on time, on budget is number one goal. But then thinking about, this is a journey. This isn't a typical building system where you put it in and never changes. This is something that can enable you to change over time. So it can be a journey that, all right, let's talk about what the needs to have are today, but it's a roadmap of other things that can be implemented that maybe want to haves, but then when you implement them, you start realizing how much of a difference it can make for your organization. And then it ultimately becomes a need to have over time.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that leads nicely into one of the questions we got in advance. And so the question is, why would a company looking to future-proof look to Igor or Nexos? And I think I might refine it slightly to say a company looking to be future resilient, because it's very hard, even for an amazing platform like what we believe we have, to argue you're going to be totally future-proof. But I think there's definitely a future resiliency component. So why would a company who wants to be resilient in the face of constantly changing technology, why would they look to Nexos?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, one of the things that we really embrace is standards. So power over Ethernet, that's a standard. IEEE standard. USB, it's a standard. And that allows us and our customers to use different parts and pieces that exist that are best of breed, and that can also have, let's say if there's a supply chain issue, or if there's some other issue, things could be, swapped out for one another. You have your preferences, but it enables you to continue to evolve as new products come out. So for instance, the network switches, right? We don't create the network switches. You're able to use, as a company, you probably already standardize on something, and your IT department prefers something. So for you to be able to choose and utilize that particular network switch, and then as new network switches come out or upgrades come for that, you're getting those benefits independent of us. And so for instance, with Cisco, we work very closely with them. The first 90-watt switches for Cisco anywhere in the entire world were deployed with our solution. They led with us first. And actually the first 2 installs and they were out in New York, Manhattan. So that's an example of, where I'm a big believer of focus your effort on your core, and then you only can be good at a few things, almost no matter how big of a company you are. And the further you get away from that, the more your customers are sacrificed, the more, because they're just not getting the benefit that they deserve. So for us to leverage others in these, for network switches or for the sensors or for certain types of end user software, that really allows us to future proof, and we can focus on one part, but then it's just a matter of us upgrading the software, making it as software defined as possible too, so that the nodes are really as dumb as possible, for lack of a better term, so that it's easy for everything is software defined as much as possible, and then it's easy to upgrade that way.
So I think this is kind of interesting. How would you say, when we think about how we're trying to do all of these things to keep our technology open, adaptable, flexible, so your company can be resilient to future new technology we haven't even imagined yet. So then in your mind, what does the future of Nexos look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that I get excited about, but so just a couple. One is on our cloud now. So we really have 3 different parts of our technology. We have our nodes that bridge between the OT and the IT. And then we have our local software that even if the internet goes down, it's still acting as the orchestrator of data and collecting data, managing the local site. And then we have the cloud, which you can see all of your sites everywhere. And I'm really excited about that in particular, because that allows what I call the Dropbox of IoT. And the primary administrator, they see everything, but then they can send an invite, just like you would in Dropbox, to just a certain folder. You can send an invite to just a certain building or floor, or all the way down to a specific device if you really wanted to, and then provide that. And so someone would get that as an email, and they would see, okay, you've been invited to this particular space, let's say an office, and now that person who's now in that office can control their climate control, and because we're integrating to climate control via a number of different ways, and to lighting, and to your security, and which would be your door locks. And it just provides this really easy, simple way of getting access to anything, anywhere, anytime, and doing it in a really comfortable, convenient way. So that's one thing. And then another thing that I get excited about is we've been working with Cisco on an install of kind of this next gen technology for both of our companies. And it allows for putting solar panels on a window, powering the node with those solar panels. And so we're only drawing power over Ethernet if necessary. But otherwise, it's kind of almost like the evolution of an electric car or hybrid cars when you're doing regenerative braking. Only use harness energy that you can in other ways to be as sustainable as possible, and then be able to be as efficient as possible. But it's going to really allow, that's one of many different tactics I see emerging over time. And most of these are going to be DC based, that we're effectively a DC nanogrid for buildings, and a very smart one at that, because it's data first. And so by being able to hook up peripherals to the node that can generate electricity as well, ultimately having the option of sending energy and acting as a little generation system, so that you can imagine the transformative nature of, and how important net zero buildings are, and the conversation right now about sustainability. This will play a key role to making that happen.
Yeah, I want to encourage you, Mimi, to talk a little more about sustainability generally and our technology, because there's always been an element there. What you've described is pretty awesome. it's saying that you don't even have to send power generated by solar panels to a battery and then to a device. It can literally go through the node as it is. And that's sort of a future thing, but it's not that far off. It's starting to, we're having some test installs, right? Some smaller scale projects where we're proving this is possible. So how else, what else about the Nexos platform excites you or really shows how we can support sustainability initiatives, which are becoming critical in this world?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of, we're taking this data, we're bringing it up to the cloud and then providing actionable reports for a lot of sustainability, not just energy, but which there's a lot you can do there, but also space utilization. And by better understanding how you're using your spaces, you can better appropriate your spaces differently. You could change the algorithms to be more aggressive as to the energy usage and things like that in certain areas that aren't used as much. And then, when you expand the scope of, and we can satisfy, whether it's LEED or ASHRAE 90.1, but there's a lot of local jurisdictions. So for instance, New York City in Manhattan, they're putting in place a very aggressive sustainability approach where buildings have to gradually become net zero. And there aren't a whole lot of technologies that can get you there, right? I mean, it's very aggressive when you got these very tall buildings that don't have a lot of footprint from a horizontal standpoint. You can't just put a whole bunch of solar on them and generate on the top of them anyway, and generate electricity. So you have to look at other ways that it's not just the offensive game of generation, but it's also the defensive. How can you be really good at managing the consumption? And some of the things that, we also just recently did an install with Cisco at their sales office in Manhattan. In that particular office, if you go there, you'll see some amazing technology demonstrations of power over Ethernet powering standing desks where they go up and down. And so power over Ethernet in general, but then also with our technology and bringing on other types of OT devices and USB and so forth, you get the combination of those things together and you basically have a DC nanogrid, which can be highly controlled and managed as to every single end device if it is if it's receiving power, or to really understand its power consumption so that you can get your maximum effect from sustainability. Ultimately, you look at Fortune 500 companies, you listen to what's happening right now at the SEC level, Securities Exchange Commission, and some of the things that they want to put in place for publicly traded companies. There's already been some, investors are looking for how can they understand not only what people are saying, what these businesses are saying, but how can they be sure that they're walking the walk and talking the talk. The way to do that is to get real data. So having a platform like ours, get real data, and then having that data generate reports that then would be published on the, when people do their quarterly filings and so forth, when they publish it to the stock exchange. So those are the kind of things that will be happening over time for sustainability. It's obviously even being further exacerbated by war and by COVID and supply chain issues. And I mean, it's just name it, right? There's just all these pressures to create a more sustainable society. And then beyond that, though, you're thinking about health and wellness and security, and there's the well building standards and these other standards. So we also have reporting in our cloud for PM 2.5, which is particulate matter, which typically you'd hear fires in the West in particular, that releases a lot of particulate matter. It gets in your lungs. And if under 2.5, I think it's nanometer, or I'm trying to microns or something like that, that it's so small that particle will never leave your body. It will like enter your cell or something like that, such that it doesn't leave your body. So it's a dangerous type of particle that you don't want to get in your body. So by having these kind of sensors, it verifies that your air filtration is working effectively. CO2 sensors verify that you're not going to, if you start getting high CO2 levels, you'll feel irritable, you'll feel tired. So your concentration, your productivity goes down. but even additionally, it symbolizes that there's not enough circulation in the room, which means you could take that data and feed your HVAC system to turn on. And even if it's not changing the temperature, just bring in fresh air. That will help against whether it's COVID or other illnesses. You don't want to have stale air in your room because you just have sick people, right? People won't feel good, or they'll literally get sick because the longer the same air is in the room, the more virus, whatever virus that might be a fairly benign virus, but you just don't want people sick. I mean, there's just, try to keep people healthy.
Absolutely. And so we did get some technical questions I'm gonna start pushing into a little bit, trying to keep them high level, of course, but certainly some questions about cybersecurity. It's becoming so important. And we're talking about keeping a building that's now software-based, really, controlled by software, secure, and protecting the company's information. How do you approach this? And just give a general overview about what, you and Igor are doing to be cyber secure.
Yeah, we're doing a bunch of different things. We have a whole list of different cybersecurity things that, we're working with Fortune 5 companies that are, I would say, it feels like they're more pragmatic about this than even the government. So that has made us stronger by having to satisfy those requirements, and they're ever changing. What's interesting is that people are very concerned about IP security, but they tend to not be concerned about other types of technologies, which is the real problem. So for instance, BACnet, which is the standard, and now there's BACnet SC, which is a secure connect, but the overwhelming, and that's very recent protocol modification. So the overwhelming number of BACnet devices that is the typical standard for buildings, they have no security at all, right? So we go well beyond that. The nice thing about having an IP-based system is that, and when we're adhering to this IT standards and not just dealing with facilities, a lot of times facilities networks are seen as you don't have to adhere to those standards. But when we have a true IP system, then we fully embrace it. And you can use all the different tools that are available to do testing, as well as protection and maintenance and monitoring. And those, if you look at typical proprietary systems, let's say if it's a proprietary protocol, not using typical Ethernet, or using an Ethernet cable, but it's not actually IP, or it's using some other protocol that's not over IP, then you can't use those tools to really test it. So you don't really know if it's secure, but I would probably say the security isn't even nearly as close as what it otherwise would be. So by putting it onto a standards-based technology that's worldwide, used for every application that exists, used for the most real-time systems, by being IP-based, enables you to utilize all the tools that exist in that world, in that universe, right? Which, once again, IP technologies are used at the most sensitive sites in the world for the military and the government and for these other companies. They wouldn't use IP technology, they wouldn't have fully embraced it unless it had already satisfied those requirements. So it allows us to employ those same strategies, and it allows our customers to employ those same strategies to verify that we're adhering to the same standards that they demand of all of their other systems.
And I know we could make a whole webinar about the cybersecurity components and go into detail. So maybe we'll have to think about something like that. But I also know sometimes you don't want to talk about all the details either.
Yeah, there's a lot of different details. I mean,
yeah.
There's so many different individual protocols and features and standards that you can list off. It's it's overwhelming. So we have those that if anyone's interested, they can reach out to us and we can go over those individually.
Yeah, absolutely. We did get a question about, controlling the color of lighting and, thinking about use cases where maybe creatives work and versus healthcare providers versus others, and just the importance of that proper color calibration. So how do we, you've talked about how we really can do all the advanced lighting controls and more, and we talked about Nexus as the full platform, but let's go back to this lighting. How do we do that? Like, how do we achieve this ability to manage and control and refine lighting for specific use cases?
You really have, when people talk about color control, they mean one of two things. One is Kelvin control, which is kind of the warmth of the light. And another one would be true color, red, green, blue, and the blending of thereof, where you can create any color. So when it comes to the Kelvin level, we work with lighting companies. They will test our nodes that substitute typical LED drivers. They test that with their fixtures. A lot of times they will incorporate it into their manufacturing process. So it comes off the assembly line and it's ready to just be plug and play when it arrives at the job site. So that's really nice. And it's just done through typically two different channels where you have a low Kelvin and a high Kelvin channel. And then we do a mixing of those two to create the Kelvin level that is desired. So we just have in our software a slider, and you can just choose the Kelvin level that you want. We have an automation that allows you to do circadian rhythm, which is effectively throughout the day, it changes to just like following when you go outside and the sunrise, it's reddish. In the middle of the day, it's bluish, and at the sunset, it's reddish again. So we just follow that. It's basically an algorithm that throughout the day, you set your latitude and longitude of where you are geographically, and it knows when the sunrise and sunset are, and it follows that pattern, no matter the season. So it's pretty cool. Then, from an actual color standpoint, the nice thing about that is, and by the way, the circadian rhythm, it's not just cool, it's also useful medically. There's a lot of reasons that it can memory and keep you attentive. And if you look at your iPhone, I don't know if other phones have it, but you'll have the ability to turn off the blue or reduce the blue light that comes out of your phone at night, because that light is known to keep you awake. But if you have blue light all the time, then your body gets accustomed to it, and it actually depletes you. So it's better to have this variety that naturally occurs. But with the colored light, you can use that for signal. So we have at schools, this one Davidson High School that we have case study on our website, that when there's a gunshot that goes off, we have a gunshot detection sensor attached to the system. Then the part of the hallway that it was detected in turns red, and the other parts that are away from the gunshot change a different color. So, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that happen, digital signage, there's first responders that are notified, there's alarms that go off. There's, it's like, kind of like being a red alert in Star Trek, but it's all automated, which is awesome. So the color can be useful that way. We have an office building that is in Manhattan that is has taken a Crestron light, which it can be used for conference room. It has USB connection on that Crestron light. So we just connected that up to a node, and we send it a signal to change either red or green, and allow people to know, is that conference room available, right? So it's there's lots of ways that light can be used as a signal. And then of course you can use it for enhancing your brand. So as a company, you want to create an engaging environment that is something that is fun and either for retention purposes, for exciting your customers when they come to your facilities, whatever the case is. But you can, with our technology, it's real time. It's kind of almost basically the theatrical level quality. So you can actually send commands to change the lighting in milliseconds. So you can create really interesting animations and then use color to enhance the space as accent lighting and so forth.
Thank you. I mean, it's just really cool that we just talked about lighting, and there's so many use cases there. And then when you start to add in things like sensors and additional things, the potential is almost limitless. That can be scary actually too. Sometimes there's so much potential you don't know what to focus on. And sometimes, we can certainly help guide customers who want to know what's available. We did get a question. I don't want to miss this one because I thought it was really interesting. Dwight, what's the most challenging deployment in Igor's history? So think all the way back to SIPCO, and feel free, maybe was there one that was challenging, even if it wasn't a huge project, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That question, we're always pushing the boundaries. And so probably at any point you could say that there's one project in particular we're pushing the boundaries on throughout our history. And so some of the things that were really challenging in the past are easy now. But, some of our more challenging projects would be, for trying to think. So I would say, right now we have a challenging project where the cabling wasn't done very well. And when you have something where a foundational part isn't done well, then it becomes that much more, you're kind of like sitting on quicksand, right? And that would be the case. I don't care what you're deploying. There's always going to be a prerequisite for anything that is deployed. So, but one of the things that we always do is look at, when we encounter a problem, how can we make it so that that problem is mitigated in the future? And so some of the ideas around that is, how can we verify the cable in an automated way to make sure that the signal strength is adequate and sufficient to be a rock solid foundation? And you can imagine being able to automate that, then it becomes something that no matter how big your install is, if all of a sudden you can just see a report of all the suspect data integrity issues between different points, you just went from this gigantic problem down to a punch list of bam, bam, bam. Now you know exactly what cables need to be rewired or looked at. So those are the things that, our mission is just to make this plug and play. And it's Murphy's Law though, right? So anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And it just comes down to having a very systematic automated way of bubbling up an action list so that what is hard becomes easy.
Great. I'll just say to everybody, please submit any final questions you want us to try to get in now, because we are nearing the end. I do have a couple final ones that I thought I would throw out there, Dwight. Let's just begin. You can list them off or just pick one. It might be hard, but what do you think is the coolest feature about Nexos today?
Yeah, I think the coolest feature is just when you see something plug in and just pop right online, and it's just so easy, right? I mean, that was my goal when starting the company. Because I had so many problems with that in traditional systems. And it's just a really simple thing. And it's kind of silly, but it can't really be overstated as to how important it is that I want to move the conversation. I want that to be so simple that that's not the conversation. But I do think that that's the coolest and most exciting thing, is that it just works. And you can just plug in different things and it just works. And so then the conversation can evolve to, well, what do you want to do with this data? And go well beyond just talking about a building as a shelter and like the typical stuff, but talk about it as a mechanism to enhance your business.
That's awesome. It's just satisfying. I've seen that, I've helped lead trade shows and stuff where I see, I'm really worried about it all working. Then all of a sudden everything's plugged in and things are just popping up online and you can just assign them to a space. I can do it, and I always think that's important for someone as a marketer at Igor. We did get a question about the most challenging aspect of marketing. So I might take this one a little bit light.
Okay.
I think something, you touched on this earlier, there's a lot of decision makers and stakeholders. So refining our messaging in a way that's easy to understand and can grab their attention and display value that's relevant to the person who's there. That could be that decision maker or an influencer in the room. That's pretty tough because you've got a lot of competing interests and there could be a lot of noise in the market. So that for me, that's something I'm always refining and always trying to experiment with new ways of doing things. I don't, Dwight, did you have any thoughts on what you think has been one of the toughest parts of marketing for Igor?
I think you hit it right on.
Yeah.
It's just there's typically different people. There's enough different audiences. It's not a simple one audience that you just target and you just go after it over and over. It's several different targets. And the other thing, I guess, would be different industries, you know, share objectives. So schools, they have completely different objectives. You know, security
Totally.
for a school is completely different than security for a senior home, you know.
Yes. Yeah, not just different decision makers, but different verticals and what they need from our solution. It's a lot of fun, I would say, but that is a challenge, speaking the right language. So we're nearing the end. I'm just going to ask maybe a fun question or two to wrap it up, Dwight. I know you've worked on some proposals and competitions for, you know, U.S. government things, and this is all public stuff. We're not revealing anything, and a lot of them dealt with the future of energy storage. If you remember, do you remember some of those ideas that were considered, or what was something that you thought, like, boy, this seems off the wall, but was seriously talked about?
Yeah, what was interesting on energy storage? I mean, there's obviously a theme going to become more solid state there, but you know, there's been, so I was brought into a conversation for the future of moon bases. And so NASA asked me to sit on this panel and you know, a lot of it was energy transmission. Well, it really, the challenge was, how do you get on these permanently shadowed regions, is what they call PSRs, that are at the polar regions of the moon? How do you get the energy from the generation facility that's at the top ridge that has solar panels? How do you get it down to the bottom of the crater? And then how do you transport things? Because there's water there, because it never gets sunlight, so it stays cold and water can stay there, or ice can stay there. So it was a lot of energy transmission questions. And I mean, there was microwaves, there was laser beams, there were, you know, string a mile of cable, there was effectively batteries back and forth with robots. And what ended up being an interesting one was that, you know, it costs a lot of money to bring cable that far. And so that wasn't really viable, but there was a lot of confidence in batteries. So even though the microwaves and lasers, there's probably, that is the future in many ways. I mean, based on all the, and I ended up learning a ton, especially when you don't have an atmosphere. You know, transmitting energy is a lot easier through lasers and microwaves. But the reliability of solid state batteries, as much, you know, batteries in general, but and actually really good batteries, which we don't typically see used because they're too expensive. But the batteries that they use in satellites, for instance, they last almost forever. I mean, the recharge cycles, there's not, you know, when you have a cell phone and you get irritated after a few years because it just doesn't last, the battery doesn't last. There's actually battery technology that avoids that, but it's just too expensive to use unless you're, you know, in outer space, you know, far enough away where it'd be impossible to replace. So yeah, I've had a lot of great conversations with Department of Energy, with NASA, with some incredible agencies in the government. And, you know, it's always a privilege talking about this stuff because it gives me a lot of, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of negativity that has happened over the last few years in particular with supply chains and COVID and war. And, but you start in those conversations, it's so aspirational and inspirational. There's a lot of great work being done to bring humanity to the next level. It's really cool.
I think we need to end on that. Let's end on a great note of hope and future forward thinking of forward, you know, pushing humanity in a good direction. So Thank you so much, Dwight. Really appreciate your time today. I think we got most of the questions answered that were submitted in advance and asked here. We will do a follow-up email. Give us a little time to get stuff together. I've got some ideas. Since we've talked about DC microgrids and case studies and all of that, we're going to take a look at what we've got and what we can send out that might be relevant to everybody who sat in this conversation today. But otherwise, that is it, folks. Thank you again, and thank you, Dwight.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Kim.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.